which is the American Transformers Convention.
When are we?
We're here now in '96, and the convention was '97.
Okay, that's the fourth convention then.
Yes, yeah. I mean, they've been quite small scale, I think, to this one, and this one was in New Jersey. Yeah. In Rochester, New Jersey, and you know, I was flabbergasted. I didn't know there were Transformers conventions. I didn't know there was a thing called Beast Wars. I was just very out of the whole loop on Transformers. And suddenly there was this organiser, a guy called Glenn Hallett, asking me to write a 16-page comic for the convention on Beast Wars. So it was a very rapid find out what Beast Wars is in the first instance, and then, you know, sort of do a comic book again, which I hadn't done for maybe a year. So that was interesting, and I got to go out to BotCon, and it was at BotCon I met Bob Ford and Larry DiTilio, who were the script editors on Beast Wars, and I also met some of the voice actor talent, guys like Scott McNeil and David Kay and so forth. So, you know, it was a great introduction to Beast Wars. I got to watch a lot of it, hang out with the voice actor artists, and I got on really well with Bob and Larry. So one of the things that, you know, nothing came out of it, but it was one of those nice, here's my card, you know, sort of, you know, I hope we can talk sometime. And so that happened, and then a year later, or maybe not even a year later, Bob phoned me up out of the blue and said, you know, we kind of use some of your Generation 1 work, or Generation 2 work, as some of the basis for Beast Wars.
Wow.
And, you know, so we kind of like you as a sort of nice sort of quid pro quo to come and write an episode of Beast Wars, which I thought was a wonderful thing. And, you know, at the time I still had a full-time editorial job, so it was very much an add-on to that. And Bob, you know, and this sort of progressed through and through, and, you know, and gradually it ended up as, you know, the second part of Nemesis, which unfortunately the end of Beast Wars, but it was great to actually, you know, it got me my first TV animation work. It, you know, sort of revitalised my career in many ways. But while all this was going on, Titan being a company that repackaged old comic strip, I suggested to them that they take all the original Marvel US Transformers material and collect it. It had never been collected at this point. And at first they were a little wary of this, because at the time, even though Beast Wars was around, the brand itself wasn't, you know, amazingly, you know, in the head. There was no American comics publisher. There wasn't really a kind of animated show other than Beast Wars.
No, we're talking late 90s. Right?
Yeah.
The big boom hadn't come yet.
No, indeed. And, you know, so it took some arm twisting and some convincing that there was an audience out there. And we tested the water by collecting the kind of stories that comprised my run at the end of the Marvel US series. And anyway, they sold brilliantly, and that was it. Titan were off and running on the collections. And we actually beat the kind of curve on the fact that very shortly after that, Dreamwave picked up the American Comics license and were frustrated immensely that they couldn't reprint the old material because Titan had the license.
Oh, okay.
So, you know, we sort of got in, and so, you know, in a strange way with BotCon and Beast Wars and Titan, we sort of did our own little bit to sort of revitalise things.
You talked about Dreamwave. They acquired the license around 2002, anyone?
2002, yeah.
Yeah. Did they call you as one of the first persons they wanted to get aboard?
Yeah, I mean, Dreamwave was pretty much, Dreamwave and Transformers was very much about Pat Lee, who was an artist who owned Dreamwave, who brought the company up.
And down.
And down. But, you know, at the time was just a guy with a lot of kind of creative energy and love of Transformers. And very much, you know, it was a kind of, and he and the other artists involved and writers were all kind of people like you who'd grown up with it and loved it. So it was a kind of different generation in as much as these weren't people like I'd been working with originally, just jobbing writers and artists for whom this was a property we'd inherited. They'd grown up with it and had a passion for it. And it kind of came across in the art and you know, the plans they had for it and the love they had for it. So originally, you know, Pat was very much involved with both the writing and art, and they had, I forget who wrote the original series that they did.
Chris Saraceni.
Yes, thank you. Yes, Chris Saraceni wrote it. So I wasn't involved at the very get-go, but shortly after they got in touch with me and said, look, you know, we'd like you to do something for us, and you know, pretty much, what do you want to do? And that was when I decided I wanted to do stories set on Cybertron during the war, which had never been done. And so that was The War Within, and that was really the start of my working with Dreamwave. That ended, unfortunately, you know, quite acrimoniously and disappointingly, because you know, for those who don't know, Dreamwave just mismanaged their money, whatever, but went down with huge debts, owing all their creators, and were bankrupt, and nobody got any, you know, everybody was owed money, myself included.
It must have left a really bad taste amongst all the artists.
It did, and you know, sort of, I mean, there was a long time where I didn't feel comfortable talking about this, but I was very aggrieved, because right up to almost the point where they collapsed, I was having conversations with Pat Lee where he was urging me on to do more and more work, when they must have known that the end was nigh. So, you know, I couldn't quite forgive him for that. Finally, he'd been honest with me, but I went on working for at least another month before it became apparent that they weren't paying and the company had gone. So, you know, it was not a good time.
IDV, or W?
IDW, yeah.
IDW came and kind of picked that ball up after it fell out. How much time did pass? Most of the artists came aboard by
It was pretty quick afterwards. I mean, I think Hasbro by then knew they had a license that was worth something again. And I think there were several people after the license at that point. You know, I never knew who the other people were, but you know, I think there were other companies in the frame for doing Transformers at that point. But IDW won the bid for it. And actually IDW had straight from the beginning had come to me and said, you know, we would like to attach your name to this, to our bid with Hasbro. So I was involved much more from the ground up with IDW.
I find it amazing that they did actually get pretty much the whole stable of the artists from Dreamwave to come to IDW.
Yeah, I mean, and they, you know, they picked up on the artists, and although some of the artists were doing other things, these were artists with a passion for Transformers. All of them, from Don Figueroa to Joe Ing to, you know, I can't even think of the others now, but you know, that so many of them were just had a huge passion and wanted to draw Transformers. So, you know, when IDW picked up the license, they were really keen to be involved in it as well. I mean, you know, Don Figueroa was involved from early on in it, but they also brought a newer artist called E.J. Sue into the mix to kind of to start off their new series, just to differentiate it a bit more from the Dreamwave.
Well, they're going in a different direction as well. Is that something they wanted to do? Is that your input, or...?
Yeah, we talked a lot about it. We talked a lot about how to... Well, I mean, we couldn't follow Dreamwave because the Dreamwave material was tied up in bankruptcy, and there were series that didn't finish, and storylines that, you know, we just couldn't touch. So it had to be some kind of restart. And originally we talked about doing a kind of Crisis on Infinite Cybertrons, where, you know, we had multiple worlds and it would collide into some big, you know, sort of levelling and contracting of everything into one continuity. But we thought that might actually be off-putting for new readers who just think, well, we missed something, you know. So in the end we decided to make Transformers a little more contemporary again, to bring it right up to date, set it in the present day, but set it as the start of the story, to have the initial cut and thrust of the war between the Autobots and the Decepticons played out on Earth, but as with a slightly altered point of view. So, you know, instead of being stranded on the planet for millions of years, it was much more about them arriving on Earth in a covert style to try and find something that is on Earth and has value to them. And that was kind of, you know, we now just had a fresh start for everything. And we put a few little new twists on some of the established characters. and just try to reboot things and bring in people at a ground level.
Do something different.
Yeah.
Basically. Yeah. Cool. Well, we're pretty much up to now, time-wise. I'm trying to follow a timeline here. Without going into specifics, I know you can't do that, but where do you see the series going?
Well, strangely, at the moment, I'm not very involved in the IDW series. You know, I mean, I'll always be involved with IDW to a certain extent, but the way my career's taken me at the moment, I'm deeply involved in some TV animation work. I'm doing a lot of StarCraft work. So Transformers has got squeezed a bit, and they've got other writers, and that's really good. You know, it's great to have fresh takes, to have people continue what I started with IDW and take it in new directions. But, you know, I'm always talking to IDW, and I have, you know, a couple of things, you know, sort of in the works and bubbling under for the next year or 2 years. But actually I've been doing far more for the movie side of things, for the, you know, they've done comics based around the live action movies. And I've been doing a series called Transformers Nefarious, which spins out of Revenge of the Fallen. And, you know, whatever you think of Revenge of the Fallen, we have tried to do a good story out of that and make it much more character focused and give some of the characters that only got like a scene or two in the movie some chance to sort of actually develop some depth. And, you know, so we're not using Megatron at all, because he was kind of removed from things at the end of Revenge of the Fallen. We're focusing on Soundwave, who was a character that didn't get hardly any screen time. So we're using Soundwave, we're using Sideswipe a lot more. You know, we're just trying to give some of the characters, you know, a bit of screen time while we can, and tell hopefully a good story as well. But yeah, you know, I mean, I always hope to be involved with the IDW Generation 1, just because, you know, again, I feel quite parental, because I was there at the ground and pushed it all off in certain directions.
Indeed, yeah. You talk about some animation projects. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's not out for another year, but it's a thing called Mad Hatter Chronicles, and it's about a kid who jumps through a cinema screen and goes to fight movie monsters who've grown up in another dimension where they've become real villains.
Okay.
And, you know, because it's partly down to his sort of family, he's got to go in and kind of clean up this mess as this big hero, where he has sort of special powers and so forth. It's a little Harry Potter-esque, it's a little Ben 10, it's got a, you know, a flavour of all that, but it's a really fun project to be involved in, and I love TV animation. I haven't done any TV animation for 5 years maybe, since I did some Atom, and so it's great to be back involved in TV animation. It's very different to comics. The scripting process is very different, because you do a lot more sitting around a table with other people, taking, you know, your ideas and getting other people's input into them, you know, breaking scripts apart and seeing what does work, what doesn't work. So it's a much more team effort almost, getting it to it. And then, you know, it goes off to a storyboard artist who has their own say in the way the whole thing happens. You know, they'll put a different spin on the action beats and the dynamic of it. So I really like it. It's much more collaborative. It involves me going into the animation offices and having a lot of meetings with the other creative people. So, you know, I'm looking forward to see how it all comes out. It's going to be a 3D computer animated series.
Oh, okay. Cool. Well, that pretty much brings us to the end of our formal chat. So let's open the floor up if you have any questions.
Question is coming. That's what I mentioned. There were 2 Death Set series, miniseries. I got them both. Death Set was kind of popular with me and some people that I knew, so it was good work. So if you ever have anything more about that, come with it.
Yeah, well, I mean, Death Set was another one where for a while I was sort of not with the character again, because when Marvel UK had its second burst of UK/US titles, they did a thing called Death's Head 2,
Yeah.
which was actually, you know, as, again, more or less a reinvention of the character to make it a bit more a bit more 90s Marvel comics as opposed to 80s Marvel comics. And in the way of these things, I don't own Death's Head, it's a Marvel character. So, you know, I don't always become the writer of that series. So it was another writer, and so for a while I didn't have anything to do with Death's Head. But, you know, I'd use the original character in some of the comics Marvel US was producing.